guys, so I have 2 pounds of clay here to form the volume for our vase, our 2-part vase project. This is the piece I'm going to make. So again, it's divided vertically in thirds. So it's going to have kind of a high shoulder tapering to a narrow foot, and then made from a separate piece of clay, we will add a thrown neck a little bit down the road. So a couple things I'm going to go over during this. I'll be throwing the volume from 2 pounds, or maybe just slightly more than 2 pounds of clay, and I'm going to do the thrown foot that I introduced in the picture project. I'm going to show that again because I think it's a really useful skill. It can save you some time without sacrificing form with a little practice. So that's a important skill. So okay, 2 pounds, then I'll be adding the thrown neck, and I'm also going to introduce using a torch, which is a small propane torch. I use this for pretty regularly to dry out the lower section of the volume, just to firm it up enough so that I can add the neck and throw the neck right off that thrown volume. So I'll be talking a bit about this also. All the things not to do with this torch. Okay, so I've basically just pounded the piece of clay into the center of the wheel like I always do, and I'm going to actually just refer you back to our Centering 2 Pounds video in the Essential Skills series that's free for everyone, because there's nothing different about this. We're just going to center kind of a normal, like not particularly high, not particularly low and wide shape. So a little shorter than a soup can. That's the idea. So just a quick review though. Right thumb over left. We're going to add some water. Always remember to pick the water up on the bat, and the right hand fingertips are going to do the work. So I'm going to basically squeeze in with the right hand fingertips like this and create those horizontal bands on the outside of the piece, and then just apply a little downward pressure, right thumb over left. Okay, so I'm going to begin by opening. So I'm going to have my ring and middle finger touching together. I've got my elbows or forearms down on my legs. My legs are at 90 degrees. So my thighs are parallel to the floor. And I'm just going to dive right down into the center. And I want to be opening less than 1/4 inch from the bottom, because again, this piece is going to be thrown flat bottom, which means we're not going to be trimming, so we're not going to be really removing anything. So it's got to be pretty thin. So I'm working from the center out, working my way down. And it's always difficult to know exactly where you are, especially as you're sort of learning. Eventually you kind of develop a sense for it, but I know I'm a little bit high right now, but I'm going to just show you how to check. So I'm going to use my needle tool and down through the center, slide my finger up to the clay, and then you can see we've got something in the range of 1/4 inch. Actually, I've got a ruler right here. Yeah, actually it's just a little bit more than 1/4 inch. So I'm going to go a little deeper. And sometimes I like to switch hands actually when I get to kind of the details of the bottom of the pot. So I'm going to use my left hand now. My middle finger will then lead as I move off to the right, and that's kind of critical, right? The middle finger is stronger than the ring finger. So for the detail work, I find it's useful down in the bottom to lead with the middle finger. So, now keeping in mind, we have a fairly narrow foot. This is just a general measurement of our width, the widest point of our foot. So I'm just going to take this and just drop it down in there and make sure that I've got a little bit more width here than I'm going to need, because as I go to pull, it will get a little narrower. So our piece is open. Next thing to do is just to stand up the wall. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water to the outside of the wall, and then use my sort of similar to the centering hand position. So I'm going to use the heel of my left hand and the fingers of my right, and make sure there's enough water, because you'll be using a lot of surface area to touch the clay for this, and just sort of stand it up. So I'm going to add some water running down the inside wall, the outside of the wall, and then pick the water up on the bat. So what I'm going to do now is just a pull. I'm going to lead with my middle finger of my left hand and support my middle finger with my left. Support my middle finger with my ring finger on my left hand. I'm going to move across the bottom, push out into the wall until you see this little bump start to form, and then come up underneath it, but wait a little bit. You don't want to kind of crowd it. You want to have a little space vertically. There we go. So you can see it's nice and straight and tapered in slightly. And that tapering in thing is really great, because it lets you, it saves you a step. It saves you the step of collaring in. So if as you're moving up, you can also be moving slightly in to kind of create the cone shape while you're pulling. That's a really good move, so I recommend kind of working towards that. So when you're pulling a cylinder, really be thinking about pulling a cone, or move in a slightly inward and upward direction. Okay, again, I'm going to push out my middle finger on the inside, start moving up, and then come up underneath with my outside hand. The contact surface is my middle finger on my right hand and the sponge. So I measured my paper cutout, and we're looking for something in the range of 7.5 inches. So right now we're at like 6 inches, so we got a little bit more pulling to do. Okay, so we're looking for another inch or so of height. So I'm going to start to dig in underneath the wall a little bit and push out just gently with my inside hand. And since the wall is starting to get thin, I'm actually going to start to move out from the inside as I pull up. So that's going to give me a little bit of shape while I'm also pulling. Okay, so you can see just a little bit of volume starting to form now. Let's check our height again. And the height measurement is just the height of the volume on the paper cutout. There we go. So that's 7 inches. So one little thing to know here is I need to stretch this in order to make that nice wide shoulder. So in order to do that, I need to make it slightly higher, because as I stretch it, it's going to actually get shorter again. Okay, again, I'm going to cut underneath the wall a little bit, and I just mean push under the wall and make the base a little more narrow. And then I'm pushing out from the inside. The low part of the form here is fairly narrow, so I need to make sure that I kind of push in enough. Okay, so I'm working my way up. The volume here is going to get refined quite a lot during the ribbing phase of the throwing. So, you know, like some weebly wobblies in the profile here are fine. No big deal. You're going to fix that in a little bit. So, one important thing to remember is you don't want to end up, well, there's all kinds of important things to remember, but you don't want to end up with a pond in the middle of your piece. So I'm going to use my trusty sponge and rubber band on a chopstick and just pull the water out of the center, especially with a thin, like an untrimmed foot. You really don't want to have any water in there kind of weakening that, so make sure you're on top of that. The next thing to do is we need to kind of taper this in at the top a little bit, and that's really important because the neck needs to get dropped down on top of that. So I'm going to show you a hand position now that is for coning, which is basically like a way to reduce the diameter of the rim. So what we're going to do is take thumbs, first fingers, and middle fingers. You're going to bend your first fingers and sort of make like this face, like that, right? Like a face. And you're going to basically use all 6 points, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to crush the rim in just gradually and use use plenty of water, and it will reduce the diameter of the rim. So there's my water coming right up on the rim here, and just applying pressure all the way around that circle, and it gets quite a bit smaller. And as it does that, it gets thicker, right? So then you can pull through that extra added thickness, and that will give you sort of like a nice way to close the rim in even more. But I'm going to wait because we need to do some ribbing now. So what I've done is created a little cylinder, right? This little area here for support at the top of what will become our nice volume.